So tonight we're looking at the height of the Mechitza. How high does the Mechitza have to be? So we all know, we've all been to varying synagogues that range in their terms of, to start with the presence of Mechitza. But that, of course, if we're going to speak of halachic synagogues, then that's not part of the equation. By Jewish law, Mechitza is required, and we're going to get to the source of that. But even within Orthodox synagogues, self-proclaimed Orthodox synagogues, you'll have varying degrees of height. And this is a controversy. This is a split that began in the probably somewhere in the 40s and 50s, when Jews started populating in America, Orthodox Jews specifically. I mean, Jews lived here for a long time, but Orthodox Jews started coming after the war. And, Judaism was in the space of trying to figure out how Orthodoxy positions itself within the modern world. And there are a number of controversies that came up that are in that context. The Mechitza is one of them. Like, how do we deal with the golden Medina, with the golden land, right? The new world. So yeah, some higher and some lower, obviously. Which is why you don't find sources for this discussion anywhere before that. You don't find from European writings discussion about the height of the Mechitza. You're an Orthodox and you go get a Mechitza to the top. I mean, there's no discussion of the Mechitza. Only in America, the questions start to become, because you have to start kind of embracing a new culture and trying to incorporate. You don't want to isolate people. The questions start to arise. This is what it seems like the history is.
In Europe was
full Mechitza. No, separate room, but had a full Mechitza, full height. I don't know if it was to the ceiling, but it was a full Mechitza in the old European countries. But the old American shows didn't have that. So when the new Orthodox arrived in the new land of America and they see short Mechitzas, now the question becomes, like, should we stay this way? Should we not stay this way? Should we go back to the way we were in Europe with the higher Mechitza? Are we going to isolate a bunch of women who don't want to show up now? Like, what do we do with this? So the discussion opened up to begin with, and we have varying degrees of opinion.
The actual, that's height.
No, thickness, I haven't seen discussed.
You don't see it, no problem.
Okay, so the material, maybe we'll discuss a little bit. The material, yeah, so the material, we're going to focus on the height today, but the material we'll see a little bit, and the material is going to come down to the same really discussion of the height as we'll see. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into it. So we're going to see. Specifically, we're going to talk about height, but the material is also going to come up. The question of material is also going to come up because the two are related, really, as we'll see. So there are two camps, of course, in this question. On the one side, you have Rabbi Feinstein, who's on the more lenient side, who allows the Mechitza to be lower, and we'll discuss and see where he arrives at and why he says that. And then on the other end, I put the other side, the Rebbe's opinion, because we're the Lubavitcher, so we're going to look at the Rebbe's opinion if the Rebbe has one. If there's a discussion that we're learning about, and the Rebbe has an opinion, of course, we're going to read the Rebbe's opinion.
Right in the Diverging was 3 weeks ago. The Rebbe told Courtyard about it.
Yeah, so we're going to see some letters here from the Rebbe, and but really the voice of the opposition to Rabbi Feinstein is really Rabbi Yoel Satmar. Rabbi Yoel Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Satmar, in his book of response to Teshuvos, Divrei Yoel, has a very lengthy 10-15 page response to Rabbi Feinstein's argument, and he goes through it piece by piece by piece in a very scholarly fashion. But we're not going to look at what he said. I'll mention a little bit about it, but we're going to look at Rabbi Feinstein and the Rebbe. So let's see. Let's first start with the rabbinic source, the Talmudic source of the notion of Mechitza at all. So we're looking at the text here that has the English pages where it says Mokodes be'inyin Levi Mechitza, sources with regard to the height of Mechitza. That's what the title there is. And the subtitle I wrote, the opinion of Rabbi Feinstein, and I gave the citation to where he discusses, and then the opinion of the Rebbe, and I put the source of the book where the Rebbe is quoted as well. So this is the Gemara in Sukkah, tractate Sukkah, page 51b and then 52a.
Just one second.
Yeah.
This thing about height, but it's understood that it can't be see-through.
Let's see.
Because who cares the height?
Let's see. Not so simple. Let's see. It's going to come up. Let's see. So this is the Gemara commenting on the Mishnah. The Mishnah describes the Simchas Beis She'eva, the celebration of Sukkot in the temple. The Mishnah describes it in great and beautiful detail, and I recommend reading that last chapter of Tractate Sukkos. And then as the Gemara always does, takes apart every piece of the Mishnah. So here's the Gemara commenting and says, the Mishnah continues, at the conclusion of the first festival day, meaning to say, right, Sukkah has two sets of festivals. There's the first 2 days and the last 2 days where we have Simchas Torah. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no first 2 days and last 2 days. You have first day and last day. There's only one day Yom Tov in Israel. So at the conclusion of the first day, festival day, meaning after the first night of Yom Tov, Mechitza Yom Tov, the first night of Chol HaMoed, the priests and the Levites descended from the Israelite courtyard to the women's courtyard, where they would introduce a significant repair. So what does it mean? The Gemara asks, what is the significant repair? What are we talking about here? So Belezer said that it is like that which we learned elsewhere. The walls of the women's courtyard were smooth without protrusions initially. So it's just a wall with a room inside. That's it. The women's courtyard it's called the women's courtyard, not because only women are in there, but because that was the room at which point the women can enter. There's another room after that called Ezras Yisrael, and afterwards the chamber of the Koyanim and so on. So the women's courtyard was just a room with smooth walls, without protrusions. Now, subsequently, they fixed protrusions to the wall surrounding the women's courtyard. Each year thereafter, the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water, the simplest place to shave of the celebration of Sukkot night, they placed wooden planks on these protrusions, creating a kind of balcony, and surrounded the courtyard with a balcony, right? And they instituted that the women should sit above and the men below. So this is the great institution, the separation of men and women at the celebration of the Simchas B'Shem. So our sages taught, the sages taught in Tosefta, right? We know this. The Mishnah is written within the century after the destruction of the Second Temple. And the Mishnah essentially is an edited collection of texts that were written from the oral tradition from the last centuries before, but not all the texts of that generation made it into the final cut of the Mishnah. So some of the other texts made it into other collections known as Tosefta or Breita or so on. So very often, almost always, the Gemara will quote texts from the Tosefta and the Breita as they elaborate and explain the Mishnah in more detail. Yeah, following. The Gemara quotes a Tosefta. The sages taught Tosefta. Initially, women would stand on the inside of the women's courtyard, closer to the sanctuary, to the west. Right, the temple is built. The length goes east to west, and as you progress westward, it gets more holy. So finally, get to the western point, which is the Holy of Holies itself. So, and as you progress more and more into higher holiness, less and less people are allowed to enter. Like until this point, non-Jews, until this point, impure Jews, until this point, women, until this point, men, until this point, Levites, until this point, Kohanim, until this point, only Kohanim are in the service, until this point, only the Holy of Holies, and so on and so forth. So initially, women would stand on the inside of the women's courtyard, closer to the sanctuary, to the west. And the men were on the outside of the courtyard and on the ramparts, the area outside. So initially, it wasn't like that. Initially, the women were closer in and the men farther out. And they would come to conduct themselves with inappropriate levity in each other's company, as the men needed to enter closer to the altar when the offerings were being sacrificed. And as a result, they would mingle with the women. Because if you wanted to go west towards the action, towards where all the sacrifices were happening, you have to walk through where the women are standing. So therefore, the sages instituted that the women should sit on the outside and the men on the inside. So put the women on the east and the men on the west. And still they would come to conduct themselves with inappropriate levity. Therefore, they instituted, in the interest of complete separation, that the woman would sit above the protrusions with the balcony we described above, and the men below. So the Tosefta is giving us a more elaborate, detailed version of how the separation began. So initially, it was always a separation, but because of the circumstances, the separation wasn't good enough. So they slowly made the separation greater, so there's no mix. Okay, so the Gemara asks, we're just going to conclude the Gemara here because it's interesting nonetheless. The Gemara asks, how could they do so? I.e., how could they alter the structure of the temple? They added protrusions into the balcony. But isn't it written with regard to the temple, all I have given you in writing as the Lord has made me wise and by his hand upon me, even all the works of the pattern? Meaning that all the structural plans of the temple were divinely inspired. So how could the sages institute changes? How could they institute changes? Come join us. So we're on page 2 in the middle. So on page 2 we're on page 2 of the English text in the middle. So how do the sages add a balcony to the temple? In the interest of separating men and women, they built a balcony in the temple to put the women higher. and the men on the bottom. So how could they change the temple when the verse said that everything is exactly designed by God? So Rav said they found the verse and interpreted it homiletically and acted accordingly. It is stated, the land will eulogize each family separately. The family of the house of David separately, and their women separately. The family of the house of Nathan separately, and their women separately. This indicates that at the end of days, a great eulogy will be organized, during which when men and women will separate. The nature of this eulogy is discussed later in the Gemara, which indicates to you, by the way, that even a funeral has to be a separation. Even when it's not just a time, in other words, if the Gemara just stopped earlier with the story of Sukkah, you might have concluded when there's a big celebration, we have to separate because people are in that mode and there's greater possibility for impropriety. But at the time of eulogy, we have to separate. Like you see from the story, even from the Gemara's proof that even eulogy needs separation. The Gemara says, they said, and are these matters not inferred by an age for Tiara? How much the more so? If in the future, at the end of days, refer to this prophecy, when people are involved in a great eulogy and consequently the evil inclination does not dominate them because they're in a sad state, not in a state of levity. So you'd imagine that their desires are subdued. And typically during mourning, inappropriate thoughts and conduct are less likely. And nevertheless, the Torah says men separately, women separately. And now that they're involved in celebration of the drawing of the water, it's Sukkah, there's dancing, there's music. So, and as such, the evil inclination dominates them. Since celebration lends itself to levity, all the more so should men and women be separate. This is the Gemara. So this is the Gemara's source for the notion of separation. And the main source for the separation. Now let's look at the halacha of Rambam before we get to Rabbi Feinstein. And let's look at the different ways of understanding what was the intention in the separation.
Well, they can bring it from Polish Marion with
Yeah.
Straight from Torah.
Good question. Good question. Okay, so now in understanding the way Rambam interprets the reason for the separation, we'll get to understanding the height of the Mechitza. So here we have Rambam on page 3, top page 3. Rambam Hilchos Beis HaBechira, Perek Hey Halacha Tes. Rambam laws of the building of the temple, chapter 5, passage paragraph 9. He describes the temple and the structure. So he writes, the women's courtyard was surrounded by balconies so that women could look on from above and the men from below, meaning everybody could watch the celebration, right? The men wouldn't, not everybody was dancing at the same space here, by the way. At the celebration, too many people. Only the sages would dance, and the Hajimaisa, certain people would dance, and everybody else would watch. So he describes it, the men would stand at the bottom and watch, and the women would stand at the top and watch. And what does he say? In Hebrew, in English, it translates as from below without intermingling. So it's a little bit of not a perfectly exact translation. Look at the Hebrew. He says they build balconies. As the women's courtyard has balconies. So the women can watch from above. And the men can watch from below. Today, in order, so that they shouldn't mix. It doesn't matter if they see each other. If you take this line strictly, it only matters that they're not mixed, not they don't see each other. This is the premise of Feinstein's argument.
So the Rambam says
Rabbi Feinstein's interpreting Rambam this way. Rabbi Yoel Satmar takes it apart completely. I'm just telling you where Feinstein's argument comes from. In this reading, in this passage. However, so this is Rambam in his book of law. Rambam in his commentary to the Mishnah, which was written many years earlier, he writes as follows. So he says like this. It's the second text there. It says Pirush Mishnah is La Rambam. Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. Sukkah Sham on the tractate Sukkah mentioned above. So there he writes.
it's not the next thing.
It's the next thing. Yeah, it's the same thing. Right, the next one after I put on page 3.
After you above him.
Yeah, the next paragraph. The next after the next paragraph. The box, like the image of the text inside. They're actually letters. Yeah, you see it?
Yeah.
Tikkun Gadol. What's the great institution that they did? Like the Mishnah said, the separation of men and women was a great institution. It was a great, what was the word they used?
It's a major fixing.
A major fixing, a significant repair. Tikkun Gadol, this great institution. Not something about it's to say, says Rambam. Gadol hatayalas. What it means when it says that there's a great institution is that there's a great value to the institution. Who and this is because the people would then have places allotted for men and women respectively, separately. The place for women above, the place of the men below. So the men shouldn't see the women.
But who's saying it's now?
Rambam
So it's
seems to be different. Rambam in his commentary to Mishnah writes that what's the reason for the Mechitza so you shouldn't see each other? That's the case. Get the Mechitza up to your waist. If the Mechitza that would stop you from seeing. But if we're going to take the Rambam, the strict language, and the Rambam is wording in his halacha that they're not intermingled, and it's not necessary they don't see each other as long as they're not mingling. And this is the center of the dispute between the two opinions.
the Rebbe, by the way, we're involved in meaning
So
instead of seeing.
we're going to see where the Rebbe comes from soon, but let's just get all the picture first. So now we're looking at Tosfos Yom Tov.
What does Rabbi Moishe function do with this?
So sorry.
What does he do?
Okay, he has a whole explanation as to what the Rambam meant there and whatever. So now we're looking at Tosfos Yom Tov, another commentary on the Mishnah. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. But he writes, okay, Pirush Rambam, so towards the end, the left, towards the end of Tosfos Yom Tov, you see it, it's the last text on page 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up. Yeah, Pirush Rambam, the Rambam comments and explains, as we just quoted, the reason why they separated men and women is that the men shouldn't look at the women. And he's right, says the Tosfos Yom Tov. He's right. Because the men below, they themselves weren't doing the dancing. They were watching the dancing. And by having the women look from somewhere else, they didn't see the women. Rabbi gives a citation to this description of how the dancing took place. The people who would dance, or Yachassidim, or the pious ones, etc., could come on, as we'll describe soon. So if the men and women aren't dancing themselves, so what's the reason for the separation? Now we have the answer. What the Tosfos is saying is, if the point here is that men and women shouldn't intermingle, then you have to go so far to put them on different floors, just separate. To begin with. But no, that wasn't enough. You have to make them go to different floors. They're not dancing anyway. They're watching someone else. Because the point is we want them to see each other. Oh, that makes sense. Because the men looking at women, maybe the Kalas Rosh brings to levity. He goes on to describe the type of levity might lead to accidental emissions. Okay. So we have here already two views. We have, or at least you see, this is the bit of the conundrum here. The commentary of the Rambam and the commentary of Tosfos Yom Tov is clear. What's the reason for separation? They shouldn't look at each other. From Rambam's halacha, it's not stated clearly all we want is they shouldn't mix. But he writes, in this way, they're now not mixing. But does that mean that's the only reason for the separation? The Feinstein would say yes. And therefore, if we're looking at Rambam's commentary versus Rambam's ruling in halacha, follows ruling in halacha. And his ruling in halacha is, it's a question of intermingling. And as long as they're not mingling, good. Even if it's not so high. And thus he writes. So you should know the context of Rabbi Feinstein's letters is not what you would imagine. Actually, he's writing a letter to enforce Mechitza. They came to him asking him, that's what it seems from the letter, saying, can you please write about the importance of Mechitza, because people are taking this whole thing lightly here in America. As I mentioned before, when they came to America, the whole notion of the separation of the sexes has come down. And we see it today, it's coming, the walls are crumbling more and more. We don't know who's what and what's who, right? All the parameters of what's yes, no, male, female, is all broken down. So it doesn't happen overnight. It happened over the last century or so. So the Orthodox Jews came to America and the walls of separation are coming down. So they wrote to Rabbi Feinstein and said, can you please write a letter demonstrating the importance of Mechitza? So most of the letter is actually not in the letter to be permissive and let people have a short mechitza. Most of the letter actually is to make the case for why mechitza is a biblical obligation, not just a rabbinic one. That's what he does. That's the bulk of what he does here. The first half of the letter, which I'm not quoting here, he goes on to talk about how it's a biblical obligation. Don't take it lightly. It's important, and so on and so forth. And then he gets on to, but as for the height of the mechitza, you don't have to go so high, because to him, the primary objective of the mechitza is to stop mingling. It doesn't have to be so high to stop them from mingling. That's he writes. That's right. So he's going to tell us exactly how high. Hayotzim is this. Let's read Rabbi Feinstein's letter. Page 4, the first text there. There's one text on page 4, yeah. We don't. So that's the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah. But then years later, the Rambam wrote his comment to the Mishnah way much earlier than he wrote his book of Halach. So there's not so. That's right. So many would argue that there are some times when it seems like there's a discrepancy between Rambam's commentary on Mishnah and Rambam's book of Halach. And those who want to argue, they change their mind, and sometimes you might have to say they change their mind. Decades later, not decades later. His commentary to the Mishnah is his first or second book he ever wrote. The book of Halacha is one of the last ones he wrote. So it's years later. Aside from that, whenever you have a book that's there to comment on explaining you a text versus a book written for the objective of Halacha, you always take the book of Halacha with greater weight. Because commentary wasn't like Rashi's commentary on English. Rashi's not going to teach you how to act. You got to translate the words for you. You want to know how to act, open a code of Jewish law. Now, if the code of Jewish law contradicts Rashi, you'll go to the code of Jewish law. But someone might argue that take the book of Allah. That's more important than his commentary. Because in the commentary, he's going to tell you how to read the Mishnah. How to practice, look at his book of law. Now, as I mentioned again before, it's not definitive that when he says they shouldn't be mixed, means that that's the only reason that that's the end of it. It's not exactly clear in the halacha, but you could interpret that way, and that's indeed how Rabbi Feinstein interprets it. As I mentioned, Rabbi Shaalos U'Teshuvos writes a very lengthy piece and really goes line by line through Rabbi Feinstein's response and opens up everything, and he writes everything. But we're not going to go down that hole. I don't know that Feinstein's part of Rabbi I don't know. Rabbi Yoel talks about Rebbe. Okay, so let's see. Let's see what Feinstein's writing. Hayotzim is what comes from all of this after he goes through the Gemara and Sukkah, which we just read, and then goes through the Rambam's commentary and the Rambam's halacha, and goes through a whole explanation of how he understands the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, and how he argues that the primary is his book of halacha, where he says not to mingle. Hayotzim is the result of all this. This says Rabbi Feinstein. Gambe, but the Knesset in synagogues too, where men and women gather at least to pray. It's best. Best case scenario is to do what they did in the temple. Make balcony. Women above, men below. You can still technically see, but if you're sitting in shul and you're looking at your siddur, you have to if you want to look at the balcony, women balcony, you really have to crane your head up to look up. It's a much more simplified way of making sure there's no intermingling and there's no even looking is if you have a balcony. But again, Rabbi Feinstein is not concerned with looking; he's concerned with mingling only. So separation of mingling is definitely best if you have a balcony, even if you could see each other. Yeah, so that's option A. That's the best option, just like it was in the temple. Now, if for some reason it's difficult to make a balcony, you got to make a separation literally. Kazu, the kind of mechitza, that will prevent from bringing to levity, bringing to frivolity, the distraction from prayer. It's not enough that it qualifies as a halachic separation. Like, for example, open doors could be considered a separation, let's say for an enclosure on Shabbos. Doors are open, still considered an enclosure. So you can't call that an enclosure between men and women's section. Oh, look, I have like an Eruv, can't do that. It's got to be an actual separation that's going to stop mingling. And just like as we saw, the separation with men in the front and women in the back, or first and then the other way around, right? When they switched, right? First they had women in the front, and the men in the back, and they switched it men to the front and women to the back. That wasn't good enough. And it was a biblical issue. Therefore, a 10 tvachim high separation from the floor is not enough. Because a 10 tvachim high separation could count as a separation for property. So why can it count separation for here? Because it doesn't stop mingling. Because it doesn't help. Because it doesn't help to prevent levity. Sharei, and this is where Rabbi Yoel of Satmar really zeroes in on this line and says, like, I don't understand what you're saying, but let's just read what he says. Because if all you have is 10 tvachim high, 10 tvachim is what? How many inches? Nothing. It's maybe 18 inches, 20 inches, 10 tvachim, not very high. So you do that, you can easily chat in Hanashim with the women. The lishim koish without difficulty. The ligable be a day, you can touch their hands. There's no greater levity than that. That would be considered as if they were just mingling together. But that's a biblical prohibition, as he argued before. And this is an even less separation than the separation between the initial separation that was made when they put the women in the back and the men in the front, between the two sections of the temple. And it wasn't enough, even though it was very visible that here is the end. We have to make the kind of mechitza that's enough height that they don't come to levity. So if you stopped here and he said, alone mechitza, you can easily chat, you can easily look, you can easily touch hands. You have to have a proper mechitza that's going to stop levity. What would you think the next line would be in terms of how high?
Very high.
Very high. Because if it's 10 tvachim, I can easily talk. What does he say? And this is where Rabbi Teitelbaum of Satmar is like a little struggling. But it seems to me in the next paragraph, says Rabbi Feinstein, it's enough to have a mechitza up to the shoulders.
But you can see and talk.
But you can see it. See, that's what Rabbi Feinstein says. Rabbi Teitelbaum of Satmar says. You just finished saying you're worried about them talking, which is why you don't want 10 tvachim high. But then 18 tvachim high to the shoulders, oh, that's okay. They can also talk. So their hands can't touch. Rabbi Teitelbaum is really very, very lengthy and strong on this. But this is Rabbi Feinstein's view.
You know what? Because he put the words in Hidayah, but they touch. He never said see. That's why
he never said see. He said levity, talking, and touching.
Right.
But now they can't touch because it's up to the shoulders. Right. But they can easily talk, can't they? But that's not such a levity because it's too.
Talk. Where does it say talk?
He said before.
Here.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
The reason why he didn't want the 10 tvachim high, because it's. But if what changed in terms of stopping the mingling from 10 tvachim to 18 tvachim? What changed from 18 inches to 35 inches to 50 inches, whatever it is? What changed? From waist height to shoulder height, what changed? Other than the hand.
You can't touch that.
Maybe a little more difficult to touch. But the chatting, okay, so he says that difference of waist to shoulder changes it from mingling to not mingling, even though you can see each other. This is Rabbi Feinstein's argument.
They're on a different level.
So he said to begin with, the best is to have a different level.
Even there's
right? No, because
open.
Like in 770.
No,
Second, there's a glass window, but
Rebbe said Kollel once, and the program said, "I'm not going to come into shul if those glasses are not fixed. I'll show you."
Oh yeah,
Kollel.
that's interesting. Because we're going to see the letters here. Everybody's going to discuss the. We're going to see in the letters that everybody's going to discuss the glass window. Okay, so let's see. But let's see Rabbi Feinstein's view anyway. So to me, it says he seems it's enough to have up to the shoulders. Because as I argued earlier, the problem, the issue of mechitza is not to prevent them seeing each other, right? He takes Rambam's word in halacha rather than Rambam's word in his commentary to the Mishnah. Okay, he gives this whole proof. That's right. It's not about preventing seeing each other, and he cites to his proof. As Rabbi Feinstein wrote in earlier, I didn't quote the whole response. Earlier he goes up.
So he did write about seeing before.
He explains why it's not about seeing. I said before why it's not about seeing. It's not about preventing seeing each other, right? And he says because in the temple they knew this to begin with, and they still never did anything about it. They only made them go higher because there was mingling, not because. His main argument is, look, what happened in the temple? The women were in the front. Oh, they mixed. So in other words, right from the beginning, they weren't concerned with the biblical prohibition of mixing. Before they made the balcony, they were violating the biblical prohibition. So Rabbi Feinstein is arguing, it means to begin with, there was no problem when they were seeing each other. The problem was that men started going up forward and they were mingling. So we're stopping mingling. That's the issue. This is Rabbi Feinstein's argument. From the story of how this evolves in the temple, it seems like it's about mingling, not about seeing. Because they saw each other before, they didn't care. They only cared when the mingling started. This is Rabbi Feinstein's argument.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
But then you can answer, you think in the base of English, the holding of place, the seeing is.
There's a lot of ways to break it down. And as I mentioned, Rabbi Yoel Satmar goes through every single line of Rabbi Feinstein and takes the whole thing apart. But we're not doing that. We're just going to get the overview of what the story is. Okay. Okay, he mentions that also once they built at the end, when they built the balconies didn't have any separation. Didn't have any wall to stop them from seeing. It was just an open balcony. And he gives sources and he was saying that even though the women couldn't see, but the men could see, he's talking about it makes a difference to the men who are under the balcony, you can't see, but if you're in the middle, you could see. So he argues that it's not about seeing.
That the ladies saw it.
Yeah, Shinir Hanashim, the women were seen because there was no yes, because there's no partition, it was just the balcony.
Right.
And they didn't concern themselves. So the men who were standing under the balcony, Tachas, because they couldn't see, but the men in the middle, they could turn around and see the women right up there. Right? Yeah. This is his argument. Okay, continuing, next page 5. Again, I'm skipping pages, I'm skipping sections of Rabbi Feinstein, I'm just highlighting the main things. Therefore, in a mechitza that reaches up to the shoulders, it would seem to me, says Rabbi Feinstein, it doesn't lead to levity. There, it's okay. So again, in some ways you can say that Rabbi Feinstein's argument is built on his, but it's also built on his sense that a mechitza to the shoulder is enough to prevent levity. But what if we see as a reality levity continues even after this? Would Rabbi Feinstein come along and say, no, you can still keep mechitza down there, right? So as much as you want to say it's not about seeing, it's about intermingling, he's still concerned with the kind of mingling that's going to lead to levity. So if seeing causes levity, then the whole thing falls. You understand? It doesn't matter how you interpret the Mishnah. If you're still concerned with levity, then levity is in levity. You have to take into consideration the circumstances of the people also. Right?
Proved that from the base of English. They did it twice. First they switched it, wasn't up. So
exactly.
You have
to adapt to the situation.
Madach over there was like that. For sure, over here you have to do the whole
exactly.
thing, so
exactly. That's Rabbi.
Sure
that's right. That would be his argument. It's fakert. As you see the situation gets worse, you have to fix it up more. Exactly. Meaning, so if you come to America where men and women have an easy time chatting, then you got to make a bigger mechitza, not a less mechitza. That's what Rabbi Feinstein, that's what Rabbi Satmar would argue. But, and it's not like Rabbi Feinstein definitive, like, you don't care if you see, because this is what the mechitza is required, and that's it. No, I feel that this mechitza is enough to prevent levity. But if the reality proves that levity continues, what do you do now? Right? So it's a little bit not like 1,000% clear to say, it's a little open. What is the height of up to the shoulders? Ugavoya Gimel Amas. It's 3 cubits. Shein Yudches Tfachim. It's 18 Tfachim high. And he gives a citation for that. And he continues. Va'av Shenidim Harashim. Even though the heads are visual, you can still see each other's heads, faces. Af Yudches Tfachim Kisha'im Beis. When men and women are standing.
Where is this?
The next text, the next box on page 4. Still page 4. Here. Here. Page 5. I'm sorry.
Then that's it.
Yeah, then he gives sources,
and then
the next line. I'm skipping sections. There's pieces in the middle, but I'm skipping them. Ba'af. Yeah, you see? Ba'af shenirim harashim. Even though they can see each other's heads. Af b'yudches, even when it's 18 tvachim high. Kisha'im beis when they're standing, because you can see over 18 tvachim. When you're sitting, maybe not. In other words, my shoulder height of when I'm standing covers my head now, but then when I stand up, it's my shoulder height. I can see over it. He says, this is not going to bring to levity. He just says so. Okay, what the reality says otherwise, we don't know. The Feinstein says this. I don't believe it's going to lead to frivolity that they see each other's faces. And if someone decides to make a shul where they're more stringent and the mechitza goes up to cover even beyond that they shouldn't even see each other's faces. Tovla and bracha, good for them. Ubefrat, and specifically, shahar bein nashim b'minin dinazu. Many women in this country, ein and dezaris b'kisei rosh, don't cover their hairs. They don't have sheitel. They don't have a hat. So now you have another issue. Never mind, you have the issue of the levity. You're trying to prevent intermingling. You're trying to prevent distraction during this, prayer. Another issue. You're looking at You're looking at a woman's body that's not allowed. Her hair is uncovered. So then, for sure, it's best if they had a higher mechitza. Avaladina, but as far as the strict law goes, we can permit even if it's only 18 tvachim high. And what happens if the shul happens to have women whose hair is uncovered? So he says, the great scholar, the author of the Aruch HaShulchan, nowadays, there are great dismay. There are many women whose hair is uncovered. It's okay to pray in their presence because it's already become prevalent. We shouldn't go around protesting. Mechitza isn't 18 tvachim high.
So he gave in to
it. He gives in.
Times change.
That's right. But less than 18 tvachim also is forbidden. We have to protest against this with the whole strength. Even if it was only rabbinical issue, I would say you have to fight for it. Especially considering that, in my view, it is a biblical prohibition, as I demonstrated earlier in the response of which we did not learn. Okay, so this is Rabbi Feinstein's position. Now let's look at the text of the Rebbe. Yeah.
Talking during
No, it's not just not talking. Men and women talking. So again,
here,
we're looking at this text now. So
the late question. Finish, you go to the kiddush room.
So it's a good question, and a man has to. The righteous one knows his animal, his inner animal. He's got to know what he's about. He's know what he's capable of, and make walls accordingly. The Gemara tells us, "Ein apotropos la'arayos." Nobody can be their own guardian when it comes to sexual proclivity. You don't test yourself. Don't make as if like, I'm okay. Not true. The day you say you're okay, that's the day you're going to begin to go the wrong direction. Having said all of that, the question is, in the activity we're doing now, am I required in this moment now to have a level of concentration in which I'm avoiding all distraction? And when I'm praying, the answer is yes. Therefore, I should be prevented from seeing images that are distracting. There's nothing to do with women being more or less, or men being more or less. Nothing to do. Even if it's your own wife. My uncle from Atlanta likes to say, especially if it's your own wife. If it's just your wife, and this is who you want, then she definitely should be distracting to your prayer, right? A little bit facetious, but it's true also. So there's the answer. And I'm sure in some circles, even the kiddush should be separate.
Sure, there's no such thing.
And even here in MTC, it's officially separate. I mean, it's not the Mechitza, but this is a men's section, women's section for the and this family scene. These family scene, people want to sit together with their families, good, but there's certainly the option of having separate kiddush.
In my days, there's never such thing. Never happened.
What do you mean?
In 770, anything was completely
course.
safe. You never find one there ever that meant like that.
For example, you had one second, but you had, for example, Yechidus Klaus, where Rebbe had a general audience, it wasn't the Reagan, and you had men, women, and the separation was 2 tables. That was it. No Mechitza where you couldn't see each other. They could see each other. But they weren't davening, they were focused their attention on the Rebbe, and that's it. And likewise, when they would give out dollars downstairs in the shul, and it was time for the women to get dollars, women would walk down into the men's section, get the dollars from the Rebbe, and go out.
No men, it was supposed to be no.
The men were all there.
They
They made a section, they moved to the side, and then let the women come in. But don't Mechitza. It's not a time of davening. It's not a time when you have to have this extra concentration.
That was really the answer to my question. Really disapplied to that. Not really anything.
So you see, eulogy Simchas Beis Sheva, they had this, right? So
Yeah, but you say there, it's all because there's religious things going on.
Right.
They're doing something.
Right.
Now when it comes to
Right.
Sukkah, you're dancing and other things that wouldn't go for.
so in Simchas
Rebbe
Beis Sheva, it
is
seemed like it led to
depending on
even worse, led to even greater levity in Simchas Beis Sheva.
That's why it has to be separate.
Even the
Bring
story.
it, prove it, there are
Yeah.
other things in it.
So again, a lot of it is contextual. So there's halacha, which is like during davening, you have to have a separation. And then there's like the context of know your own animal, know your own beast, know what you're about, and know your community, know who you're talking to, know what they, I'm giving a share to students that are coming from public schools, not telling anybody to sit separately. So I'm giving a share the same age from yeshiva. I'm not going to invite the seminary to give to the share. Because the context of how they live, I'm supposed to go to the public school kids who see each other every single day, sitting next to each other, and just tell them, "Oh, you're now in Torah class, sit separate." So if it's prayer where the Torah requires that to be separate, I'm sorry, there's Mechitza. Women sit here, men sit there. A shir, a program, my Shabbos dinner, not separating them per se. Where it's also to know the context of and know the crowd you're talking to also. But nonetheless, we're talking about our discussion is limited to prayer specifically. These religious events require a certain concentration.
Even in some places in Yerushalayim, the stores, they make sure it's separate.
Yeah, I even though as we're going to see here, the Rebbe is a proponent of the Talmud Mechitza very, very strongly. Nonetheless, I'm not convinced that the Rebbe is big on the modern Haredi version of separation of men and women. I'm not convinced. As I just mentioned there, but the Rebbe gave out dollars to women as it came down to the men's section. That would never happen in Sukkah. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just telling you it's mitzvah. It just wouldn't happen. Likewise, Rebbe spoke to men and women with a separation of 2 tables in the middle. Satmar Rebbe would never do that. Right? At the same time, Rebbe was in the camp of Rabbi Satmar that you have to have a full mechitza, not just up to the shoulders. Got to be up to the top. But it's again, that's in the context of, as we're going to see, in the context of a sholem prayer.
Yeah, that's why you want to create the thing, they're giving dollars to the women. That's one
Yeah,
of the big things.
that's right. That's right. Okay,
Funny, in all these years, I thought it was strictly for distraction.
so that you're right. In Rabbi Feinstein's view, it's about making sure they don't mingle. But as we're going to see from the Rebbe, the view is actually it is because of distraction. So you shouldn't see each other, right?
That's right. Because when you see each other, sometimes you wink at each other, sometimes you make a motion or something. You're distracting yourself from praying.
That's the argument that Rebbe is about to make.
Yeah.
Would disagree with Rabbi Feinstein's position, as mentioned earlier. Okay, so let's see the Rebbe's position here. How many pages? It's a few pages. We'll go through it. It's Gishmak. It reads. So these are a collection of letters. The book we're looking at here is a book called Shulchan Menachem, which is a team of scholars in Yerushalayim that went through all of the and selected those writings that are halachic in nature and organized them following the pattern of the Shulchan Aruch. So it's called Shulchan Menachem. Like Shulchan Aruch means set table, in a set table in Jewish law. Shulchan Menachem is like the table of Menachem, as in the Rebbe's table where like he offers, not exactly the translation, but it's basically, it's the Rebbe's like halachic offerings. So it's a very, very beautiful book, as you might imagine. So, but I'm saying this because it's not as if these books are written, the text is not written halachic in nature. Rebbe wasn't writing a book of halacha. Neither is Rebbe writing response on halacha. Rebbe is communicating with people, and those communications are sometimes halachic in nature. But the style of writing is not going to match the style of like the Gemara says this, and therefore you have to argue that way, and therefore it's not going to have that. He's talking to a person and saying, "Here's what I think you should do." And when he says, "Here's what I think you should do," it happens to have the halachic in nature. It's a bit of a different style than the classic halachic literature. But nonetheless, just give me the context. Okay, so this is a letter. I don't know what the date is. Does it give a date here? Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, they don't give dates, just give sources. From volume 7, page, whatever. Okay. Harichus, yeah, good. Harichus begoidel erech ha-mechitza b'beis hakneses, to elaborate on the great value of a mechitza and a shul. Bevadai, certainly achla moiseru is no, right, the second here. Chashivas and mechitza, yeah. No, first page, second paragraph. Yeah, right there. Second paragraph. Chashivas and mechitza, yeah. Harichus begoidel erech ha-mechitza, to elaborate on the great value of mechitza b'beis hakneses and a shul. The vada is certainly achla moiseru is certainly superfluous because you, the person that was addressing, certainly know the value of the shul. And now to Yossi's point. In the Beis Hamikdash Be'eretz Yisrael, if in the temple in Israel, Asher Shamro Nisim Amuchish, where people saw outright miracles in the temple. Mishnah, as the Mishnah tells us, Asara Nisim Naslavas in the Beis Hamikdash. The Jewish people saw 10 miracles every day. So notwithstanding the fact that they saw open revelation of godliness, nonetheless, they had to make a separation between men and women. As described in tractate Sukkah, and the Rambam's book of halacha describing the temple. So if in the temple where they saw outright revelation, they still have to have a separation between men and women, where there you would think they're so enthralled by the revelation of God, you don't have time to think about the frivolity. But nonetheless, human nature stays human nature even if you're in the temple. So the sages said separation, or biblical, as Rabbi Feinstein would argue. Much more so. After the destruction of the temple, may be rebuilt speedily nowadays. And we are here outside of Israel. And the synagogue, which is only a minor temple. Especially our orphan generation. We lack the leadership and visionary and prophecy and miracles that used to exist. We don't have that kind of revelation. So much more so, the idea of a mechitza in the shul is exceedingly relevant and necessary. Here's the key. This is the key. This is why I said the key to the Rebbe here is a shul. And why it's about, as Rabbi Feinstein said, I don't think this mechitza leads to frivolity. But what if the reality it demonstrates that it does lead to frivolity? What do you do now? I have to say, the reality is we see those synagogues which decided to get rid of the mechitza, where they made the mechitza too low. The eradication of the mechitza was not the end. It was the beginning of their slow degradation away from Orthodox Judaism. That was pointing at history, the history of American Jewry, essentially, and saying, look at the synagogues that were built in America over the last 100 years. They didn't take the mechitza away and then say, oh, we're going to have a perfectly Orthodox synagogue. That was the beginning to what we all unfortunately know of what they call synagogues today. And after the mechitza goes down, he needed a microphone by Shabbos and Yom Tov. The shul all of a sudden has a microphone on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Issa, which is a biblical prohibition. And they even are brazen enough to go even lower. And I do not want to elaborate in speaking negatively about other Jews, but you get the picture. It's my hope, continues the Rebbe. Based on the words of our sages, we only encourage those who are themselves ready to be encouraged. Now, as I was telling him, you are ready to be encouraged, which is why I'm encouraging you. That dear recipient of this letter will stand strong and use all means to get rid of this bad idea of getting rid of the mechitza in shul. And to explain to the people, even though this is obvious, but explain to them nonetheless. If you go to a minor minister, as a human being, the Ministry of Transportation, I don't know, whatever, and you ask of him, and you're only asking him to do something small for you. Who it is nimus means menschlichkeit, appropriateness, manners. And it's self-understood. At the time when you are actually asking the minister for help, don't do something which is the exact opposite of what the guy wants. While you're asking for a request, you do something that's opposite to what he wants. It's the exact opposite of your request. So how much more so? You're coming before the King of Kings. And you're asking for life, for your children, for a livelihood. It is forbidden, and it's like a disgraceful sin. To do something at the time of your requesting in which you are rebelling against the king, the master of the universe. So ask yourself, does Hashem want you to sit there and be staring? No. Does Hashem want you to be mingling and distracting? Definitely not. So you can stand there in front of Hashem and talk to him while your whole structure of your synagogue is that opposition of what God wants. Explain that to your people, and surely they will understand why the Mechitza is important. It's well known the teaching of my father-in-law, blessed memory. Chazaka, it is certainty, or it's a probability. That good effort does not come back empty-handed. And God will grant you success. That easily and in peaceful manner, you'll be able to fulfill the mission that God has granted you. The synagogue that you are in, or maybe he's a rabbi there, will remain a house of prayer for God, in which the prayers of Jews will be accepted.
Clear.
Pretty clear. So now this is again the next letter is a very similar letter. So I'm not going to read it. But here he says again, he adds, and this is to Alan's point. Look at the last two lines there. Last three lines. Even according to their view, prayer is all about meditation of the heart and concentration. It's a and if you just consider this fact that prayer is about concentration just for a moment, you'll conclude that you have to remove all kinds of things which interfere with the intention and the concentration. So anything that's present in the synagogue is going to serve as a distraction from your talking to God, who you came to pray to. Certainly,
people, not just
Neighbor,
women.
the guy behind you.
Exactly,
out
not
there.
just women.
What's the difference?
So definitely, 100%. If it's 100%, people talk. Ephraim Adler told me he's 100% right, and this is tried and tested. If you don't respond to people that talk to you during prayer, it's not going to take more than 3 weeks, and they'll stop talking to you. It just won't. Smile, nod, like this, motion. 2-3 weeks, they're not going to talk to you anymore.
But then that requires everyone to participate.
Exactly. And slowly but surely, you'll create that environment, right? But there's a big difference between someone coming to actively distract you while he's quote unquote violating the protocol of synagogue versus having a synagogue structure which is built by distraction, which is the lack of mechitza, which Rebbe goes on to say. We see clearly, top of the third page, a lack of mechitza. No, I'm making a differentiation between someone intentionally violating synagogue protocol, in which you have varying degrees of control over that, versus the structure of the synagogue to begin with built for distraction. It's a very big difference, right? Anyway, we see clearly the lack of a partition. Even if you designate front for men, side for women, the goddess and the spalim, it distracts the parishioners, or the female parishioners, that makes them want to peer and look at the other side. This is human nature. Okay. The Rebbe then goes on to make an interesting point, which is this is not about denigrating anybody, because halacha is that a father is not allowed to kiss his son in shul. Why is that? Because he's supposed to teach his children that in shul we love Hashem. Now, does the Torah want the father not to love the child? Of course, the Torah wants to love the father to love the child.
But why would a kiss be?
Because it's an expression of love. A father kissing a child is an expression of love, and we're teaching the son that here in shul we'll dedicate to Hashem, not on my love, but Hashem.
But aren't you supposed to love everyone anywhere?
Yes, and the code of Jewish law is saying, educate your child to learn that in shul you focus on God, like yourself. It's not halacha. So obviously, so the fact that a father doesn't kiss the son in shul is in any way to denigrate the relationship father and son? Absolutely not. So likewise, separation of men and women in Mechitza is not to denigrate the relationship between men and women, but to give its proper context. Now we're praying, we focus. Now we're in shul. Our love is dedicated to Hashem. We don't kiss each other in shul, father and son, right?
Yeah,
but not in any way to denigrate the relationship. That was comparing the Mechitza to that. It's a very interesting way of thinking about it.
A friend you can kiss.
Yes, because a
Not
friend
your
doesn't have
son.
the same kind of.
You meet someone that you didn't see.
You can hug and kiss your friend in shul,
but
but not a
your son.
child. It's part of educating the child.
Another.
But also the point is that the point is the separation is not a denigration of the relationship is the point. Torah is not denigrating the relationship of father and son by saying you can't kiss your son on shul. So likewise, separation of men and women in shul is not a denigration of the relationship between men and women. It's giving it its proper context. Now we're focusing on prayer. And my relationship with you is a distraction to prayer. It's not about following. Okay.
There's another hard thing. Two things.
This is to your point, Alan.
I never understood is where the kissing and you can't say to the zone. It's even
Right.
more with the basic measures and the shul.
I don't
You
remember
can't
that.
say to the zone. It's in the shul. No,
Oh yeah.
You can't say to the zone. That's what no one says to the zone.
Okay. The next passage we're not going to do, but the Rebbe talks about the type of mechitza, and there again. So to the point there, which is if the whole point of the mechitza is that you shouldn't see each other, then the mechitza can't be see-through.
Exactly.
It's gonna be.
It cannot be see-through.
Oh.
The question is if Rabbi Feinstein would be okay with a see-through mechitza up until the shoulders.
Right.
I should look back at his response. I don't remember.
'Cause
But
there's
thinking
no
about the
bigger
logic
thing with-
now, Rabbi Feinstein, you know what? Maybe you're allowed to, which is why you see some of the modern Orthodox synagogues. This is the mechitza that goes up to 18 tefachim to the shoulders. I don't even know if it goes that high in some of the synagogues here. But even if it did, I don't know if those mechitzas are complete full walls that are see-through. Maybe they were not see-through. To the best of my knowledge. I mean, I've been to some of the synagogues here. I'm saying here in Montreal, one of the modern Orthodox synagogues that would follow Rabbi Feinstein's view here. Are they not see-through? No, not see-through. It's a kind of separation that says this is the women's section, this is the men's section with the height. That's it.
End of story.
Yeah. But yeah, as we can see, the Rebbe is not a fan of that.
I don't think even he meant that. And once you have your till 18 tefachim, you shouldn't have it.
See, So I had this discussion with
Whatever you call the word, you know, if you see all the ways down, I'm sure he didn't mean that.
so I agree with you. I had this discussion with with a friend of mine, and I think I mentioned this about the Rebbe Feinstein's position on Kollel Akram. So
This position on.
Kollel Akram, which is eating milk that wasn't supervised by a Jew,
Oh.
but the government assures that it's milk, that it's cow's milk and not mixed with any pig milk. Yeah. So I argue that if you look at the text of Rabbi Feinstein's writing, you're not saying carte blanche, anybody can go around eating and drinking these things. He's only saying if there's a situation, if milk is not available, he's writing in the 40s when milk was not available, or 50s, whatever the generation is. I mean, not that long ago. My mother remembers growing up, there wasn't much available milk that was watched by a Jew. Only saw milk. My mother was growing up here in Montreal, wasn't so available. My grandfather bringing from New York, cheese, whatever, wasn't so available. So it's not so available. Okay, so you rely on the government. But if it's available, certainly Rabbi Feinstein would say to take it. Then I have my reasons for believing this. But I have a friend who strongly disagrees with me. He says, you can't do that. When a leading halachic authority comes out with public letters permitting something, you can't go and say, oh, this permission is limited to this, that, and the other. And if circumstances change, he would say otherwise. You can't read it in that way unless he says so explicitly. So there's room for what he's saying, but I still stand by mine. And I would say the same thing here with regard to the Mechitza. As we saw, he says, I think that this doesn't lead to frivolity. What happens if we see a synagogue who does lead to frivolity? What now? Right? So my friend would probably argue, look, Rabbi Feinstein gave him a head there. This is what he said. He going to start arguing. But I think I would still be with Yoshi's camp here. That maybe Rabbi Feinstein would say, you know, guys, put the Mechitza a little higher. You guys know the score. You know?
He
Maybe.
says at the end, you're talking all bracha if you do it.
Yeah.
He says it clearly. He says, not get the more you could do, the better.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
He's only taking the lenient side because of America, whatever.
Yeah.
He really believes that it has to be.
I agree with you. Okay, two more texts from the Rebbe. Two more texts. So one is about the height. The last text on page 3. Rebbe writes to someone, and I'm going to tell you a story I just heard from Rabbi Shmuckler this morning when I announced that the class was going to be about Mechitza. So my father told me to call Rabbi Shmuckler because he had a private audience who never told him about Mechitza, about the height of Mechitza. So I'll tell you what Rebbe said there. Interesting story. So Rebbe writes to this person. Last text on page 3. Yasher koichai, meaning good on you. The gadol schusai, and great is your merit. Al shal b'yadai, that you were successful. Lases anal, to do the above, meaning to make a mechitza. The zika sarabam, and you in this way you benefited the public. The schus sarabam talaboy, and the merit of the public, who is now going to have a proper mechitza, is thanks to you. So you have a share in that merit. And certainly the meshech hazman, over time, the divrei noyam boyfriend shall cover it. with pleasant words and in a respectful manner. They're going to add to the height of the Mechitza. So it seems like a person was a rabbi in a synagogue where there wasn't the Mechitza at all, separate sections. He was successful in putting a Mechitza, and they was congratulating him and saying, over with time and with kind words and respectful manner, the Mechitza will grow a little bit. They make it higher. Ad, until what height? Sheyiu lamaila mikaimas ish. Higher than the height of a human being. These are the kinds of measures that are relevant to the height of man. This is a reference to a Mishnah in which what's like another the Mishnah is discussing different measures, and the Mishnah says that some measures are absolute and some measures are relevant to the mashu adam, based on what people's size is. So you're talking about the height of the Mechitza, you can't give a blanket measure. It depends on the height of people. Why? The zil basataima, because follow the reason for the Mechitza. And in the Rebbe's view, the reason for the Mechitza is to prevent you from seeing each other. So you got to go to the height that people can't see. Okay. By the way, I just remember in the previous paragraph where it was asked about the kind of Mechitza. Yeah. Okay. Now look at the footnote 11. Footnote Yud Aleph, last footnote, page 3. Al hashayla ima kavana lagoiva shel gimel regel. Ask the question. Someone asked when the Rebbe writes that the Mechitza should be the height of a person. Does the Rebbe mean 6 feet? Haya hamayna. The Rebbe's response was lapachas, at a minimum, at least 6 feet high.
Some people are taller than 6 feet.
Now,
Most people.
Rabbi Shmuel told me to like this. So I asked him the story. He told me he was a rabbi in a synagogue somewhere. And of course, he wanted to institute a proper Mechitza. So he went to, maybe it was the president or some members of the board, or maybe some members of the community who agreed with him that there should be a Mechitza and that they should present it to the directors of the synagogue to institute a Mechitza with the board members. Now, he didn't want to do it because he's like the fanatical rabbi with a beard, so like they wouldn't listen to him. But if members of the community said they wanted it in a better time, so they asked Rabbi Shmuel advice, like how do we convince the board to listen to us? They're not going to listen to us. So Rabbi Shmuel said very cleverly, tell the board that you feel disrespected because some of the other proper synagogues that have mechitzas, and we here feel like we're in a second-rate synagogue. That mechitza, clever kind of way of selling it. We feel like we're in a second-rate synagogue. We come into it and there's no mechitza. So the board acquiesced mechitza. So what did they do? So they asked. So now when Rabbi Shmuel was in Yechidus, he told everyone what happened. They congratulated him, and he asked Rebbe how high should the mechitza be. So Rebbe laughed and Rebbe said, "Can you see my nose?" It seems like they were saying like, you got to be able to make sure you don't see the person's face. He said, excuse me. Rebbe said it with a kind of laugh. So he asked Rebbe how high. Rebbe said 5.5 feet. 5 and 5.5. Okay. So he started out by making it 5 feet. What did he do? He put metal poles with the sheet hanging down, curtain hanging down, 5 feet high. Comes Rosh Hashanah, high holidays, and the board all, of course, shows up to the synagogue. Not necessarily the board there all year round, but they're there at the high holidays. So the board shows up to the synagogue, and this synagogue has poles and curtains. What's this? What kind of shul is this? We got to get an architect in here to build it properly. So once the architect came in and built it properly, he built it 5.5 feet. So he told me, he's like, see, I saw that Rebbe's language is 100% precise. Rebbe said 5 and 5.5. Rebbe was telling me you're going to start at 5, and then you have the opportunity to get that 5.5. That's what he did. First 5 feet with the curtains, and then 5.5 feet. So here the Rebbe says a minimum of 6. I'm telling you what I heard. Okay, final text from the Rebbe.
That's what you look because more people are 5'10", 5 that. So you're seeing.
Sorry?
That number of 5.5. But most people, a lot of people are 5'10", 5'11". You definitely.
Yeah.
That's the tall generation.
I guess you have to go with the majority. I don't know. Okay, so look at the text where it says Mechitzas chuchis keha. What about tinted glass? Next page, page 4. Mechitzas meschuchis keha, tinted glass. Rebbe writes, "She'ena zachal mabitim be'ezes hanashim." Mechitza, where it's not easy to see from the men's section. They were asking if they can make a mechitza using the same kind of glass they have in 770, which is tinted glass. So Rebbe writes, why are you trying to squeeze your way in to getting a lenient version? Just build a proper mechitza, which is anyways like a squeezed header because it's difficult to see through the tinted glass. And you didn't even pay attention to the fact that here in 770, the women's section is above, plus a dark glass mechitza. Way higher than the men's section. So you're trying to find a head there because 770 has it. 770 has dark glass and it's like 2 stories high. So a guy sitting down in the thing, first of all, got to crane his head up, and even when you look up, you see black with a black outline, maybe of a human. Just from sitting there, it's reality. So you try to copy me and put yourself in mechitza, squeeze yourself into a head. What are you doing that for? Just gonna make a proper mechitza. So here we see the Rebbe's view on the issue of mechitza, and we really come to 3 things that undergird the Rebbe's view. Number 1, the issue of mechitza is preventing seeing, not just mingling, not to see each other, and not to see each other on 2 accounts. A, there is the issue of frivolity, but even if there isn't frivolity, there's an issue of distraction. In prayer, we're talking to Hashem. When we're talking to Hashem, you got to be focused on Hashem. You don't kiss your child, and you don't look at your wife. But you're focused talking to Hashem. Number 1. Number 2. What was number 2?
You do 2 together.
Not seeing. And number 2 is the distraction. And number 3 is that creating a shul whose entire structure is built on let's be more lenient than the last generation is not the end of the line. It's the beginning of your journey down the wrong direction. So look at the way shuls have been operated for the last 1,000 years. Do that. Don't be a smart aleck. It's essentially the 3rd argument. Notwithstanding Feinstein's position the other way, and look, you're satisfied with mechitza, they're not mixing, there's no frivolity for whatever reason. So that's it. We're good to go. No frivolity, no frivolity. Up to the shoulders, and you're together. Okay, so here you have an overview of understanding the underpinnings of this great controversy of the mechitza. So now you know where everybody's coming from at least.
Now, I wouldn't end up by saying like that. You have to, I know he clearly said that
He does say,
should have it.
he says it's best to have higher,
And
and he also says best case to have a balcony. He did say that also.
He said so.
Yeah. So any
Whoever's
suggestions?
using it his way.
Oh wait, next week Thursday is Purim, and then after Purim, God willing, 4 weeks, we're going to be learning the Rebbe's Haggadah. We're going to unpack the Rebbe's Haggadah again as we did last year. So God willing, that will be next couple of weeks. Have a
Maybe
wonderful
one time
evening.
we do something with the source of the